Oh yeah, our topic, for those of you who don't know, our topic is water quality. And so like how the runoff from the farms influences the lake water quality in terms of the algal blooms, because when we were researching like potential topics to focus on, we realized that there were a lot of Auburn Pub in particular articles on the algae growth, not only in Cayuga Lake, but Owasco and Skaneateles lakes. So we thought that was a really relevant topic for us to address this year. So I guess we'll just start. It's close. She's talking about the speakers. Oh.
Okay, I know what she's trying to do. She's trying to turn on the volume.
Okay, well, it's like dun 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 dun. Okay. Welcome to the SCCS newscast. My name is Kate Kopp with your breaking news. Recent floodwaters have caused significant runoff from the farms to the lakes. For information on how this may impact your life, stay tuned. The issue we will be discussing today is based upon the increased attention towards the algae growth in the Finger Lakes. The quality of water becomes directly connected to the farmers when the cyanobacteria production count is observed. Soil, manure, and fertilizer all provide significant nutrient resources for these bacteria, causing a greater number of toxins to be released from these animals, resulting in widespread concern amongst citizens. The issue we will be discussing today, the issue is determining whether the transparency of the Clean Water Act, the CWA, should be incorporated into the very strict guidelines of the Environmental Conservation Law, the ECL. The CWA requires farmers to have a public record of their CAFO plans for the entire growing season in terms of crop rotation, manure application, and other areas of their farm management. Thus, if they want to make any slight adjustment to their farm practices, they must get it approved at a public hearing before it can be implemented, which can take weeks. In contrast, the ECL has higher overall standards that must be met by the farmers, but does not require them to have a public record of their CAFO plans. Many of the average citizens believe there should be greater farm-to-community transparency. However, the farmers argue that the delay of time it takes for them to adjust operations due to the public's influence on how and when this can take place under the ECL results in reduced efficiency and productivity on their farms.
Hello, this is Kelsey LaFay with your weather update. Today is June 4th and it appears as though we're going to have a warm front coming in the next few days. With a warm front coming in, wet and damp conditions are soon to follow. Make sure to wear your raincoats.
Actually, Kelsey, we're going to need to do more than just grab an umbrella. Early springs and changing weather patterns impact a resident's life beyond a cloudy sky. The recent water quality conditions have citizens calling for action in this crisis.
Thanks, Kate. I've heard some concern within the community about toxic blue-green algae appearing in our lakes. Now let's hear from some community members.
Hello, my name is Jacob Schmidt and I'm a Central New York dairy farmer. I own and operate a large dairy farm. The recent weather conditions have been proving a tough factor in my manure application and water quality management. I believe I should have a large voice in this topic, considering my active management of all my water sources.
Some community members are concerned about CAFOs, or concentrated animal feeding operations, not having strict enough regulations. Can you weigh in on this topic?
If New York considers forcing farmers to abide by their CAFO regulations in terms of submitting their plans for public accessibility, then productivity would be hurt. I have a crop team plan upcoming planting and growing season, and the CWA is very unrealistic for me, because if a change in conditions bumps my schedule, then I'd be inconvenienced to travel to Albany. I believe all farms should enroll in the ECL, which is a much more realistic option if you are capable of upholding the higher standards.
How are you involved in this issue?
Farms in the county make up over the 80% of the Owasco Lake watershed. Being the largest industry in the area, when attention comes to water quality, blame is going to fall on agriculture. It is evident that runoff has occurred in the past, but I believe that new control methods we have enacted have allowed us to more effectively control and mitigate this issue.
How have farming practices changed from a decade ago?
Spreading methods have been planned according to seasonal and weather conditions. Additionally, many dairies have implemented satellite lagoons to to account for the overflow of runoff in spring and winter seasons. Farms have gone from primarily pea-stone calf hutches to calf barns to help with runoff from calf manure. No-tilled corn and dragline injection greatly reduce manure and nutrient runoff. In regards to the phosphorus that forms the bonds that cause these harmful algae blooms, phosphorus found in urea, a component of cow manure, would take nearly 7 years to be broken down enough to form these bonds. Human waste has a factor where it contains raw phosphorus that can immediately form these harmful algae blooms. Why are we looking at large dairies when lakeside septic systems could be a very realistic cause of this issue?
So why shouldn't the ECL regulations be increased considering all the changes made to farm practices?
The ECL is a higher overall standard, but a more realistic option for most farmers. The CWA requires farmers to submit their nutrient management plan to the local state at the beginning of each year. The CWA does not allow for fast decisions to be made based on Mother Nature and unexpected environmental conditions.
So why is the ECL that much better?
While the ECL has higher overall regulations, such as holding a 100-year storm storage facility, if your operations are designed in order to accomplish goals such as these, then the flexibility the ECL gives in terms of adjusting your nutrient waste management plan at any point in time is highly attractive. We aren't trying to avoid CAFO regulations, we just like to do what's best for our farms.
It seems as though Jacob fears his ability to make independent and on-the-spot decisions would be put at risk if he was forced to abide by the CWA. Additionally, he feels his impact on the toxic algae growth in the water is not as great as people claim it is, putting him in an unfair position as a farmer. Thus, he feels that the ECL provides the best balance between the farmers being accountable for their manure waste management plans and still being able to compete in the free market economy.
We now have with us a mother and lakeside resident. Mrs. Lynn, talk to us about your concerns.
Hello, my name is Sophia Lynn, and I am representing many proud but frustrated lakefront homeowners. I own a house on Cayuga Lake with a family of 6. Usually during the summer I can keep my kids busy and happy with swimming, boating, and kayaking, but this summer we've spent mostly inside due to harmful algae blooms. My neighbor's dog has fallen ill and is at the veterinarian's office getting cared for. That may or may not be due to these stinging blooms, but all I know is I want answers. For the property taxes I pay and just for the safety of my family, I think it's fair they have access to a clean and healthy lake.
Mrs. Lynn, talk to us a little more about the public's benefits from farmers having greater regulations.
So in the research I did, it turns out there's a plan that allows the public to see what farmers are doing. This plan is called the Clean Water Act, or CWA. It's a national farm regulation which allows people like me to access farmers every move. If all farmers were accountable to people such as myself, reduction in phosphorus levels would happen and it would be safe for my children to swim in the lake.
We have talked to another source that suggested septic systems could be a contributor. What are you doing to keep the water clean?
I'm a part of a water testing group called the Herring Program. My program trains people to collect water samples, store them, and submit them for testing. This allows me to track the water quality near my cottage and contribute to the maintenance of our lakes. Some people that live near me on their lakes have created a larger buffer area by implementing sand traps and carbon filters just in case their septic system malfunctions.
What we are hearing from Miss Lynn is her personal frustration towards the farmers, whom she feels are at fault for the poor water quality conditions. Not only does this affect her family's summertime spent on the water, but she fears it will cause the Finger Lakes to lose their pristine nature for which they've become so well known. Additionally, she is fearful of the harmful effects the toxic algae blooms may have on both public and animals.
We have brought in a DEC officer to address the biological sides of this issue.
Hello, my name is Samantha Helverson and I'm a Cayuga County DEC officer. A primary focus of my work recently has been testing and managing algae bloom growth in Owasco Lake. The strict regulations of the ECL show the waste management plans for farmers and give them proper accountability for their effective efforts.
What have you begun to implement in order to collect better data on who is the culprit for this issue?
Recently, we installed buoys into the tributaries and streams leading to Owasco Lake. This is a significant change because we used to only monitor the flow of nutrients after extreme storm events, thus leading to a false public image. Non-accurate information was being represented because most nutrients were entering the water at this time. Farmers have been struggling ever since 2 years ago when during a rapid snowmelt, surface spread slurry was photographed flowing down a hill in a snowy brown slush. Buoys will allow us to accurately represent a problem with real-time statistics.
Is this a new issue?
No, it is important we recognize that this is not a new problem. More focus has been applied to it in recent years due to large outbreaks, but it has been a point of concern since the 80s and likely much earlier. It is also important that we recognize that this issue is being taken care of. Algae blooms have been a big problem for many years and are simply coming under the microscope because the public has made more complaints on the issue. However, in response to a localized bloom in August, a weekly testing process was designed in the Auburn and Owasco water treatment facilities, and the results found that the water was safe to drink. Farmers, local volunteer scientists, and the DEC are addressing any slight issue that may arise. Requiring all farmers to follow the CWA is unrealistic and could lead to greater problems for society as a whole, such as losing out on an important crop season because of a change in the weather patterns, which would cause them to change their management plans. But they couldn't because it wasn't part of their prior one. We need to ensure that we are looking at this picture as a whole, as opposed to just one segment of it. One segment that is not nearly as impactful as the general public's perception of it is.
The message behind Ms. Halverson's argument is that this issue is not isolated to farmers, as sewage waste treatment facilities need to be managed more effectively too. Additionally, she does not see the need for the transparency element of the CWA to be implemented, as the DEC is taking other precautions to ensure the accountability of the farmers. The DEC is working with the farmers, not against them.
We now have with us the Auburn City Mayor, Mr. Bennett. Why are algae blooms such an issue, and how do you view the CWA regulations as being capable of mitigating those problems?
First of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here today to address this issue, because it's one that transcends the country and not just our local community. I've been the mayor of the city for many years, and not only does the economic impacts of these blooms concern me, but also the safety of the people who utilize the water here. Auburn is a city founded upon summer residents coming to live at their summer homes and tourists exploring the beautiful Finger Lakes. This reputation is at risk because people can no longer trust the quality of our water.
Who is at fault in your opinion?
Farms make up 80% of the Wasco Lake watershed by land use. While there can be other sources of pollution, such as municipal waste facilities, it is unrealistic to assume that the manure spread by farms isn't a main contributor. Because agriculture is such a large industry in our area, the blame of many environmental issues is put upon farmers, and rightfully so.
How do you see this playing itself out with the residents?
Many of the people who live by the lakes utilize the lake water for their homes. When these blooms become a risk, these people lose their main source of drinking water. Would you want your children or pets drink from water that could possibly be contaminated? By adding the public aspect of the CWA to both permits, the people of Auburn could know what things are being put onto the fields and could be running off them every year.
How does this affect the economy of the county?
Without people coming to Auburn living part-time or full-time, there are less residents paying property taxes and people spending money at local businesses, which hurts the economy greatly. Another argument is that municipal waste facilities contribute to the pollution just as much as farms. With that being said, at least human waste has somewhere to be contained, while what the farmers put on the fields has no way of being contained and increases the probability of ending up in our lakes greatly. By adding the public aspect of the CWA to the higher restrictions of the ECL, the people of my city can know what the issues are in their water.
Mayor Bennett's primary support for the CWA stems from the economic impact the toxic algae blooms have on Auburn's market. It is not fair to tourists nor to residents to have this harmful environmental circumstance. Additionally, he believes only good can come from the CWA's transparency, as the farmers can assure the public, and thus the public can assure themselves, of the effective waste management plans that are being employed.
I would like to thank DEC Officer Sam, Farmer Jacob, Mayor Bennett, and Mrs. Lynn for taking their time to share their pivotal viewpoints on the topic. What we do to our lakes will greatly affect them now and for generations to come. However, as Jacob has mentioned, blame cannot always fall on farmers, as CAFO systems are effective, but as Mayor Bennett and Mrs. Lynn believe, not 100% effective. Next time, we will have a special on how we will begin to monitor water conditions more effectively. Until then, please note that this issue is more complicated than it may seem. Stay safe, and remember the next time you cannonball it in, there's more to our lakes than just some water.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to us. If you have any questions, I don't know if now is a good, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, if you have any questions, you can ask them now. And if you have any questions that come to mind tonight or something, you're welcome to just email them to Ms. Wassick. And we'd really appreciate them because it kind of preps us for what the judges may ask us and just expands our knowledge overall.
So our environmentalists that are amongst us, what type of question would you see appropriate that perhaps they can answer or research, because it's all about them getting better at the data they are presenting to their audience.
Art, I have a question about, are like grass strips a requirement within the plan, Jacob, for the manure plan, in terms of like adjacent to an open ditch? Is that something that is in a requirement for farmers to have a certain distance of grass that could slow?
They do have no spread zones that are part of the plan, so you can't spread within a certain distance of tributaries that are going directly to water sources, so farmers will abide by those because they have land maps of the fields. And I know, personally from experience, we do abide by those. We try to spread, specific zones that are not going to be affected because the state does issue those no spread zones to the farmers.
What's the distance? Do you know the distance?
I'm not sure the distance, but I know it's well over 100 feet.
Yes.
Yeah, CAFO regulations have been in effect for like over 20 years now. And farmers have been ordered to have a waste management plan, and they've all been following those from DEC accordingly. So how do you explain that the problem's getting worse when they had these regulations 20 years ago to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, I mean, something that we found is kind of like that as the overall kind of the climate is changing and the temperature is rising, that the cyanobacteria needs a certain temperature and sunlight and conditions to grow, and as the temperature rises, that the conditions of the right temperature last for much longer into like a couple more months on the end of summer and a couple more months in the beginning. So it has a lot longer time to kind of grow in the, or I guess die in the lakes, because when the cyanobacteria dies is when it releases the toxic chemicals.
Also, to add on to that is, I don't necessarily know how much worse the problem is, like getting on a data point scale, but I think people are more aware of the issue, just with like coverage of the subject, residents along the lake noticing it and making it public. So I think it's become a topic that's more generally discussed than it may have been 20 years ago.
Thank you.
So for a while, like Emerson Park closed down a few times because of waterfowl. So is that just not, or like that's not being looked at or not considered to be an issue?
Waterfowl, did you
Yeah,
say?
because of geese and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, that's a major park like within the Auburn, Wasco area, so.
just because of the requirements of our competition, we only have 15 minutes, so we really, because we were also considering the fertilizer side of this, but we really have to narrow it down even more just because of the time limit. And we do know that there's a lot of other topics that we can go to.
Yeah, so we haven't really researched about the animal. That's something interesting that we could potentially maybe add into one of us. But also, didn't Long Point close last year too?
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was though due to waterfowl
That was
necessarily.
algae.
That was just because of the algae growth. Okay. So, yeah. I think that's probably where most of our ideas like stem from,
Yeah.
and animals are part of that. But we'll look into that. So thank you. Yeah.
So whether you do the one act or the other, how do the consequences differ? So if a farm continues to have runoff and they're guilty, whether it's under the Clean Water Act or the other act, I mean, what are the consequences?
The differences in the ECL and the CWAs, the ECL is designed, it's a more strict regulation, but it gives that flexibility where they don't need to have their management plan stamped out week by week. But the CWA gives more flexibility, but there's less regulations. And as far as the state plans, the enforcement is through the DEC, I believe, and there will be fines for if they come. And I believe OSHA does a lot of that, but it's more human safety. But if they come and inspect your water sources, you have to have these type of drains, and you can't have this so far within your manure pit, and it all has to be checked at the spec, especially when you're constructing these manure pits, they usually need to have them up to building code.
Also, we talked to John Patterson from Patterson Family Farms towards Union Springs, Auburn, and he said that they'll come in and check on them, and then they'll give them a warning, and then they'll come in and check on them, and they'll talk to them again. So I think it's more of like a repetitive thing, and then eventually get to the fine stage. But there's a lot of, I guess, leeway given to them to adjust their operations and.
Yeah, because like Kate said after I talked, that the DEC isn't really working against the farmers. We're trying to make this like a solution to the issue. We aren't just trying to fight with each other. So there is a lot of leeway and like there is a lot of check-in, but they don't want to fine them. But after a certain point, there's grants available so that we can help get the farms to where they need to be. So there is some leeway, but there is fines in the end.
I think most of the time it's not really an issue either, because it's not like any of the dairy farmers want to have this be an issue, because they live here, they use the lake too, and it's in their best interest to abide by these regulations, because it's just a safe practice as well, because they understand that they have to use the drinking water as well to go back to the dairy farm, and a lot of those wells are on the dairy, so it's in their best interest to keep themselves to these specs that are issued by the state.
And also the farmers keep each other accountable. Like there was a meeting held, I think, at Oakwood Dairy. O'Hara Dairy. And it was like all the farmers came in and they're talking about the water quality and like what one farmer's doing to adjust their practices and compare it to other ones. So I think they're trying to like self-check each other, because you don't want to be the one farmer that's like pouring it into the lake and another farmer isn't. Like that just doesn't look good. So.
And we also talked to Dana Balter 2 weeks ago, I think, and we had a good conversation. Then we came to the conclusion that to really solve this issue, it comes down to the money and grants. And we know that there's a few out there, but to definitely really get anywhere with this issue has to be an increase on the farming side and the citizen side.
The big complaint with ECL is the lack of transparency. Why don't we just add some transparency elements to that?
I think the change that need to be made to that is right now it's extremely difficult, the process to adjust your plan, because it needs to be submitted in the spring of each year. And if you want to change your crop schedule, whatever, like example for this spring it's super wet, then that'd be a difficult change. So I think it needs to be something in between the two. We can make an adjustment, because the public still wants to see the plan, but the ECL doesn't require that the farmers, make these available so the state can publish them.
Right, so if we just made those available and still left you flexibility to change them as necessary, that's a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, because the only thing that's going to happen is you might get a fine or someone's going to work with you. But if it's transparent even after the fact, someone can go back and look at it.
The other thing is like a lot of small farms struggle to kind of like, they have to be enrolled in the CWA because of the ECL, like you have to have so much more like facilities, and like I think Jacob might have said in his thing that you have to be able to hold like a 100-year storm storage.
It's only 25.
And it's only 25 for the CWA, so it's really hard for like small family farms to like uphold those standards. So they have to do the management plans, but then also they don't have the kind of like the ways to be able to not have the runoff. They have more less technology, I guess, to help them in that way.
It comes down to it, manure is like one of the most expensive things that dairies going to invest in, is getting rid of manure treatment. So it's more difficult for smaller dairies to have these advanced systems because they're very expensive, and also the spreading methods, drag line injection, and those methods that are newer, those are a lot more expensive, a lot more labor intensive for these small dairies to be partaking in.
One more question?
I feel like that's a really good solution that should be like presented. Unfortunately, we can't present a solution
Sure,
to the
yeah.
subject, but that's a really good idea.
We can go the other way too. I think it's probably more of a hurdle to clear than changing the CWA to some fashion to add an element of flexibility so that you can make a change on the fly.
I do have a question about this. So you were talking about what happens if like they violate the policies in the ECL, but what happens if you do change like your plans in the CWAs without the permission? Like, what if you just do it? Is it the same thing, like where there's like a lot of like repetitive warnings or before there's fines or?
Well, the gentleman who we talked to said that there's really like there's probably 20 farms in all of New York State who are still under the CWA. So he didn't really have a ton of information on that, and we didn't look into that. But our
But it is an
likely
instant fine.
oh, it
It's
is
not, yeah, it's not like a warning deal. Like if you change it and don't present that in Albany, then it's a fine.
So I think Mr. Frisbee brings up a good point, and we talked with Keith Bateman, Batman, you know,
He came to one of our forums. We haven't talked to him as we did with Dana Bolton.
so his, and presenting perhaps to, and I think Ms. Watson is working on that too, the legislative body, and saying this is what we're coming up with, because there's ad hoc committees through the legislature that are working on this. And we talked about Owasco Lake Watershed Association, and Mike Lynch, he is one of the leaders in that association, that it's good if he can present in front of that group too, because this is what they do. It's volunteer, right, but this is what they do. And so I'm sure we'll have some great feedback from the group and other suggestions such as that, so you can refine the process. You have this amount of time to do this task, but how do you fill that with the most specific, data-rich information that you possibly can? And that's where, and how we need help, right? Because we all have experience, whether it's on a farm or growing up on a farm, or our college background, public policy, and where that sets, because that's a big piece of it, right? I really commend you for an outstanding job. I know this is tough to do, to get up in front of quite a few people, but you've really mastered that, and really appreciate that. So my hat's off to you on a wonderful job, and continue to get better. So this group, what they're doing, obviously with Katie and Connor going off to college, we're working on a plan for them, for the entire group to fly to Indy next year and present at the conference, obviously. So working out those logistics so Connor and Katie can go as well, because they're an integral part of this team. So great work, appreciate it.